All right, good morning. Well, we're back today. Doctor says I have strep throat. Hopefully I'll get over that soon. We're going to look at Romans chapter 13 today. And he starts out with verse 1. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. We have a responsibility to obey the governing authorities that are over us, whether we like them or not, whether we voted for them or not. And there are at least four. There's the government, police officers, your representatives, your senators, your governors, president, just everybody. And we have to show them respect and honor. And we need to pray for them also, the Bible tells us. And but there's other authorities. For children, there's your parents, and God has ordained them over you, obviously chosen them. But just like He chose your parents, He chose the governing authorities. The king is in place because God put him there. Also the church. The church is an authority over you, and we're supposed to obey our leaders in the church. In my case, I'm the pastor, and I'm supposed to obey our elders in our church. And there's another authority that all of us have, and that's our boss, your employer. And God says to slaves, be subject to your masters. And that was not a very amicable situation a lot of times. Sometimes they weren't slaves by choice. Sometimes they were. But we have to obey all authorities over us. And he goes on to say, if you resist authority, you're resisting God. You're resisting the ordinance of God in verse 2. And so you who would say, I'm a rebel, I'm my own person, don't have to listen to anybody, you're really sending it to God. That's something we got to think about. In verse 4, he says, he doesn't bear the sword in vain. In other words, the traffic cop doesn't have a gun in vain, okay? There will be consequences for you not obeying the law, and God's not going to help you out of your situation because you messed up and disobeyed God. In verse 5, he says, pay your taxes. In verse 6 again, he says, pay your taxes, pay your customs. Any kind of tax levied against you, you need to pay it. Now, keep in mind that at the time of this writing, Nero was probably the governor of Rome. I mean, you're talking about paying taxes to one of the most evil people who has ever been in government. But with that, he says, I want you to understand, in verse 3, rulers are not a terror to good works. Even the worst ruler, which they had, is going to promote good deeds among its citizens. It's not promoting anarchy. The worst ruler is not promoting anarchy. They don't want anarchy. It makes it difficult for them to rule. It's when we rebel, even against bad leadership, that bad things happen. Verse 8, or in verse 7, he says, not only pay your taxes, but make sure you give respect. Not just face respect. Some people don't even give that. But give respect to those who deserve it, the ones in authority. Verse 8, he says, owe no one anything. In other words, pay your debts on time. God doesn't want us to owe people, to not pay them. It's not righteous. Pay your debts on time. The only thing you can owe people is love, and you're going to always owe them that. Not just believers, but even unbelievers. We owe them love. When we love people, the Bible says in verse 8, we're fulfilling the law. The law is all about love. In one word, love. In two or three words, love your neighbor, love God. Jesus he broke it down like that. Paul reiterates that by saying in verse 9, don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't covet. Those are all things about loving your neighbor. All 10 commandments about loving your neighbor. And we're supposed to do that, whether they're believers or not believers. He ends the chapter by saying, and do this, knowing the time is now, that it is high time. He's talking about an epoch, an era. The era is coming to an end, and boy, we're at the end of the church age. And he says, time to wake out of sleep. That's our spiritual slumber, where we're just kind of like, floating along, Our salvation's nearer than we first believed. The night is far spent. Night being the days of us living in, sin, the devil's dominion, And the day is here, the day of Christ's return. Therefore, cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. The armor of light is what's going to protect you. Righteousness. Living for Christ is what's going to protect you against the onslaughts of the devil and the world. He says in verse 13, let us walk properly as in the day, not in revelry and drunkenness and lewdness and lust, envy and strife. And when you turn the TV on, you're not seeing anything new. This is all stuff that's been going on forever and ever. As soon as man hit the earth, we were sinning. And every party scene, every thing that people have thought of has been going on for a long time. And he says, put it off. Don't live like that. And then he ends by saying, don't make any provision for the flesh. Don't let those things even be in your mind. It's those things that are in your mind lingering around. All of a sudden you say, I'm going to do that. I think I'll do that. And it's got you. And your armor's off. And the devil knows it. And he's ready to plunge his sword into your heart. And so he says, be careful. Don't get caught up disobeying the government or your authority. Obey that. That's from God. Walk righteously. Live for the Lord. Well, I hope you'll read chapter 13 today, and hopefully we'll be back tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow.